So just for folks out there who are not familiar with Motion, Motion's obviously been in the news lately, and very interesting news. Motion today is 75 years old,
Yep.
celebrating 75th anniversary, and has now over $7 billion in revenue, 4,000 sellers, over 700 branches across North America. And Randy and I have been working over the last few years to kind of shake things up at Motion and to really rethink the role of the sales organization, what types of investments are necessary. And it's my great pleasure to just have a kind of informal chat with Randy, so welcome.
Well, thanks, David. It's been a journey over the last few years. As David said, we've been working together for about 4 years. I actually took over as president at the end of 2018, and we started working together just before that. So over the course of the last few years, we've really transformed the company in a big way, starting with our sellers and our sales network and whatnot, but all the way through the organization. So happy to be here today with all of you, happy to share anything I can with you. And I will tell you that if you've not worked with David in the past, he has a way of making you a little professionally uncomfortable, if you guys have heard that word before. But in a good way, because the results that we've seen over the last 4 years or so have been phenomenal, and I'm looking forward to what we can do in the next couple of years.
Yeah. So why would a company that's already the number one in its segment, who's got great financial performance, feel the need to mess around with sales? Well,
you don't want to be in a position of being number two if you don't have to, because the view's not quite as good. And I say that tongue in cheek. I mean, we're not number one across the board in everything. I mean, we certainly do some things well, but there's always opportunities to improve. From a sales perspective, I'm a seller at heart. My background is sales, marketing, strategy, and you can always improve on the process. And everything in our business starts with a sale, right? I mean, if you don't sell something, what are you going to do? So it all starts with the sale. And the nice thing about what David brought to the party was, pricing can affect both the top line and the bottom line. And that's really where you need to focus first and foremost on sales, is having a disciplined process and recognizing the benefits both on top line and bottom line if you do it right.
So just taking that one point about pricing, why is pricing so hard for a company like Motion? It seems like you have strong sellers, strong value proposition. Why was there so much money in the pricing bucket?
Well, you have a lot of people in the sales department. To say we have strong sellers might be a stretch. Motion for the last 72 of the last 75 years, let's say, we were opportunistic in the sales side, but we weren't necessarily strategic on the sales side. So one of the first things we had to do was get an understanding of where we were making money, because there were accounts out there where we weren't making money, as you well know, David.
Yeah.
You made that very clear to us in your analysis. But you then tie that back to the sellers for those accounts, and you start to really find patterns where you have a group of salespeople that are truly order takers. They're not really sellers. And that's where you really need to focus your attention on flipping those order takers to real professional sellers. And that's been the journey that we've been on. If I can share a little bit more, it was 2019, right after I took over, and after having conversations with David, we had 3 national sales meetings. So we're pretty much a North American player. We do have a business in Australia and New Zealand, but for the most part, the majority of our revenue comes out of North America. And at those meetings in early 2019, we had to get on a new journey, particularly as it related to our sellers. And I made the statement to everybody in the audience. I said, if you're a C player, you need to go ahead and tune your resume up, because we don't have room for C sellers in our business. You're either going to be an A player or you're going to be a B player that has potential to become an A player. But if you're a C player, you're likely always going to be a C player. So we made some tough decisions, and we called a bunch of people. We also said the same thing to our suppliers. If we're going to be a high-performing A business, an industry leader, we don't need C sellers on the supplier side calling on our A people. So we saw a transition on the supplier side where some of them got rid of some sellers and put some professional sellers in place to support us. And that made a big difference as well.
So 4,000 salespeople, 4,000 pricing strategies.
That's exactly what we had. And also maybe 2,000 purchasing agents. You know?
That's right. It's a it is a very entrepreneurial culture, though. That's one of the things we were trying not to lose as we went through the journey, was how to keep the entrepreneurship. But I think one of the jokes we made, which was really true, I think, was that Motion's approach to sales enablement pre-journey was really, our managers hire people who look like themselves. We throw car keys and keyboards at them and say, go get them, Tiger.
Yep.
And they knew the products well enough that they could add value for customers, but the way the customer journey has been evolving technologically, it just wasn't enough anymore.
It really wasn't, and I remember there was an old sales adage that was out there before I took over, and it was, you know, just get the order. Once we get our head inside the tent, we'll see what's in the tent. Bad strategy, because a lot of time what's in the tent doesn't smell so good. So I'd rather know what's in the tent before we go after it, right? And then go after it with a plan where we can make money. So on our journey, we really had to look at our business, and we had to do some changes. We talked about change management in the presentation earlier. We went through some major change management. First thing we did was we identified a small group of executives, which we call the A-team. And David led the four of us. There were four of us. There are four of us. One of them sitting in the back of the room back there, James Howe. And the A-team had to really strategize on what were we going to do to transform the business. First thing we did was we created a new vision statement for the company. And the first of 5 objectives in the new strategy was develop a profit-optimized go-to-market strategy. Because before that, we were a sales-optimized strategy. Once we became a profit-optimized strategy, that informed a lot of decisions that we were going to make down the road. We also had to recognize that we had what I call the ABCs in our business. A was for arrogance, B was for bureaucracy, and C was for complacency. And we had a bit of that in the business. And we had to intentionally start working to get that out of the business. So once we started getting these things in place, and it had to come from the top, the leader had to set the stage and get behind what we were developing and promoting. And once we did, we pushed it all the way down, and we started to see the changes take place in the business in a very good way. We were fortunate that our parent company, Genuine Parts Company out of Atlanta, decided to have a voluntary retirement program in early 2020. We had the ability to exclude anybody we wanted to, but I made the decision not to exclude anybody if they qualified. And what that did is it allowed us to encourage some of the old timers. I'm one of them, by the way, didn't get encouraged enough, but to encourage some of the old timers that were set in their old ways and didn't want to embrace the new changes and the new strategies and the new technologies to go ahead and exit the business and do it in a graceful way. So that opened up the opportunity for some new younger people that were more energized and on board with what we were trying to accomplish to get in the field and begin the selling process at a higher level.
I think one of the courageous things that Randy did as part of that transformation was actively identifying who are the blockers to change in the organization, and having the courage to first get those people out of the organization, which was critical because too much of Motion's future success was being actually obstructed by certain individuals. And then secondly was a willingness to reorganize the executive team to be customer-centric, understanding how the modern buyer is buying, and to align Motion's resources organizationally to support that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We did have a couple of blockers in the organization, and typically the worst offenders or the worst blockers were in a vice president level or higher. Had been around the company for years and years and years, liked the way it was, didn't want to change it. Highly compensated, but they certainly didn't want change. I remember our senior VP of IT one time at a sales meeting said, you all have to realize, talking to the whole sales organization, you all have to realize we are a technology company that just happens to sell bearings and power transmission equipment. So everybody looked at each other and said, I thought we were a sales organization. You know, and we had to get that straight. The only way to get that straight was to move that person out, because we are a sales organization. Once we removed that blocker, it was amazing how fast adoption to the new strategies, the new plans came about. And more of our business was going digital, and that individual wanted to hold the digital part of our business close to the IT vest. And the first thing we said was, the digital platform, your digital sales platform, is part of the sales process. It's not part of the IT process. And once we made that transition and put our digital business, our web business, our EDI business into the sales bucket as opposed to the IT bucket, it was amazing how fast we were able to transform our digital strategy and move forward. And now our our web business and whatnot is on pace to be about 15% of our total business in the next 3 years, when it was less than 1% 2 years ago. So major changes.
One of the interesting choices that you made was putting James Howe in charge of not only strategic pricing, but also sales excellence.
That is correct. You know, you have to have a leader. You have to have somebody that lives and breathes it every day. That's what they get up every morning to determine, how are we going to be better at selling today than we were yesterday. And also somebody that embraces the technologies. James happened to be that guy for us because he had run part of our business in the West for many years, so he was already running a significant part of the business, about $700 million worth of business, but he was also a leader amongst change. And when we put James in that role, he had instant credibility with the field because he was one of them. But he also had the ability to shift over to a strategic viewpoint and drive the strategies that we were wanting to drive, particularly as it related to sales and sales excellence.
So when you think about the importance of strategic pricing in being able to invest in the business, what was the role of the outcomes from pricing?
Well, you know, if you don't put a financial number on it, you're probably making a mistake. So we said, you know, we would like to pick up about 200 basis points in gross profit improvement over a period of about 3 years. Well, we're actually just about at 500 basis points of profit improvement, gross profit improvement in 3 years. So from a financial standpoint, you think about us being almost, a $7 billion company, 500 basis points starts to add up to a few nickels here and there.
So 350 million
Yeah.
and 20 times.
So
EBIT.
what we do with that money is we reinvest it back in A players, right? And we invested in technology that allows us to be more efficient from an operational standpoint. And eventually, when you start looking at it, it trickles down to the bottom line. So when we started this journey, we had an EBITDA of about 6%. This year, we're going to be bumping up into the 10% range. So the trickle effect is amazing.
And we're not done with that.
We're not nearly done. We have a goal that's much higher than 10%.
Yeah. So as you think about, for a lot of companies here, we do have some big companies here in the room. What's different when you do this at scale compared to, let's say, a company that's under $500 million?
Well, it's hard to say because I don't run a company that small, David. But I would say at scale, you just have a lot more people to convince to get on the bus. That's the biggest thing. So you have to formalize the program, maybe more so than just having a sales meeting with, maybe 25 sellers and saying, all right, here's what we're going to do. You have to have a formalized program. And one thing we changed in our vision statement is we set a vision statement and a strategy that also had an accountability part to it, where we really didn't have an accountability part to our strategy going prior to me sitting in the seat here. So now we measure our salespeople. We went so far as to change their comp plan too. So we pay, just in simple terms, we pay a commission on gross profit dollars generated. And that was fine. And what you found is you had some sellers out there that were very comfortable selling the same customer over and over every year at the same price level, because they had their house paid for, their bass boat was paid for, they had 2 trucks in the garage, and so on and so forth. So we had to change the compensation model to make them stretch every year. And to do so, we also looked at the pricing for the customers that they were serving, and also new customers. And that drove a lot of our strategy to sell at a higher margin. A lot of this, though, and I don't want to discount the fact that it does take a lot of work to analyze the data. You have the data. Whether or not you're using the data you have is the question. And if you're not utilizing the data you have, David and his team can certainly step in and help you utilize it, understand it, figure out where the opportunities are. Then you have to have the courage to change. If you have the courage to change, it can make a difference. It can make a huge difference.
So as we look back on, one of the things that's striking to me about Motion's success was just how urgently Motion moved. So if you just look at
We only moved urgently because you were kicking us in the butt every 2 months.
Well, we were definitely pushing hard, but if you think about it, in 2019, Randy defined a new culture and vision. Same year, not 2 years later, they did this ruthless self-assessment versus the industry best practices, really talking about what Mike Kunkel was talking about earlier. What are the building blocks? Which pieces are immature or missing altogether? Prioritizing the pieces that were critical to success. All that level setting was done in 2019. 2019, pushing out key executives who were actually standing in the way of change and having the courage to then reorganize the business, bring the right functions under the right leaders to be able to move forward. All of that in the space of 12 months. And then in 2020, you had this early retirement program, which basically led people who didn't see a future with the company or didn't want their future to be with the company, given the alternative, who moved out just ahead of COVID. Then they get locked out during COVID from the customers for prolonged periods of time, and they have to start rethinking what they're going to do. Right in that same time frame, we start working carefully on what does the sales force of the future look like at Motion, given the changes in the buying processes, the buyers that are out there, not to mention the demographic changes in both sides of the equation. So Motion, roughly speaking, over the next 5 to 10 years, has almost half of its sellers who could go into retirement. And interestingly, that's also true on the buy side. So their customers are going through the same demographic changes. And so as you think about what will the world look like, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's a huge question of how will knowledge get transferred across the organization? How will the things that our sellers today know show up in the daily conversations of our next generation of sellers? And how will we serve our buyers with that much turnover? So there's a huge knowledge transfer issue that we were thinking about. And that right around that time is when we started really heavily focusing on sales effectiveness and digging in. So today at Motion, for example, there are sales talent analytics that we use to assess whether inbound new sellers or even existing sellers have the right sales DNA to be successful. Do they have the traits that predictably lead to high performance if trained and managed effectively? Or we have now invested heavily in a new sales training program. Talk a little bit about that, Randy. What was the historical approach to sales training?
So we really didn't do much in the way of sales training. We did a lot of product training, and a lot of our manufacturing partners would come in and train us on their products and whatnot, but we really didn't invest any in actual sales training. So when David brought this up a couple of years ago, I would say, he introduced it to us. We weren't necessarily, ready to jump on that bandwagon, and then we thought about it some more. We got a little bit more push from David, and we finally said, you know what? We're going to be left behind if we don't invest in teaching our people, particularly the young ones coming up, how to sell. It's a difference between taking an order and making the market. And you've heard that phrase used, market makers. We made the decision to become a market maker. And to be a market maker, you have to be educated on how to do it. You just can't go say, I'm going to be a market maker. And the selling process that David and the team introduced to us is allowing us to become that market maker. You mentioned Allego earlier, and you've got the CEO coming up in a little bit. And
Yu-Chen.
you know, I was one of the early adopters to jump on the Allego platform that we started using and communicating with our salespeople and whatnot. So it really needs to come from the top. You know, you've got to set that stage. But it's a great investment. And while we always want to invest in maybe distribution centers and we want to invest in equipment, this and that, I think the smartest thing you can do is invest in your sellers first, because it all starts with the sale.
So when we started looking at the data, we found what we'd call indiscriminate order takers. And that's not what vendors are looking for. Vendors are looking for partners who can be market makers. We found two things that were particularly interesting. One was that the sales team would sell the customer the non-strategic vendors' products where they had perfectly good strategic vendor stuff available. And then secondly, Motion serves about 20 different vertical markets. So basically their customer portfolio is just a grab bag of winners and losers across the industry. We started saying, why don't we just start overweighting our sales team on those markets that are more profitable and that have better prospects for growth, and let's start peeling away some of this stuff that isn't. Talk about the importance of strategic market making.
Yeah, so it wasn't just what markets we were selling the best in or making the most money in, but it was also which vendors. And you know, a company of our size, we were cutting checks to 39,000 vendors a year. We looked at that and we started to really evaluate from a vendor standpoint, who are we making money on and who are we not? We've reduced that number by a third in the last 2 years. And still a lot of vendors, but we've reduced it by a third. And now the vendors that we support more strategically, we incent our salespeople to sell those products from those vendors because we get higher rebates or more rebates or this, that, and the other. We get a little bit more leverage with them. When we make a call in there, we usually get the attention we're looking for to satisfy the order and fulfill it with the customer. And as you all know right now, we're all struggling with the supply chain issues. It's nice to be on the top of their call list when you have a product you need to get out. So, in doing so, the sellers started making more money because we were supporting suppliers that paid a higher rebate, and their gross profit margin went up when you include the rebate in the margin. So all of a sudden they started seeing a little bit bigger paycheck, and they're scratching their head and wonder why. And then we had to educate them on, well, because you're selling the right vendors now. So it's a combination of all these things that allow you to become a market maker instead of just that indiscriminate order taker that we once were. We're not there yet. We've got a ways to go. But at least we're on the right road and we're on the right journey. And in the next few years, we're certainly going to continue to improve ourselves.
I think as we did the work with Indian River on making a buyer-centric sales process and really understanding the building blocks of success, that gave Motion, I think, a lot of confidence to invest in technology as well with MI Pro and with the new sales analytics from SPARXiQ. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we don't have a CRM per se. I've heard some CRM comments out here. Getting your salespeople to use it after you've invested all that money is, it's pretty tough. But we did develop an internal tool that is tied right into the SPARXiQ data and whatnot, and it allows us to really look at what we're selling our customers, who we're selling to, determine pricing. The most important thing that I think SPARXiQ brought to us was they were able to analyze the data and tell us, based on our own historical data of selling that product, what the right price level was for a specific customer of a specific size in a specific industry. Now, how valuable is that? And what we found is there was too often we were taking the order, we weren't pricing it strategically, and we knew with 90+% confidence that if we priced here, we were going to get the order. And how often did we price here just to make sure we got it?
Yeah.
Right? So we flipped that, and we were able to take our tool that we developed in-house called MI Pro, which David mentions, and we're able to push out that data to our sellers to make sure they're selling at the right price. So that's when you start to achieve sales excellence, is when you're selling the right product at the right price to the right customer. And it's a journey, but you have the data. Nothing that David did for us was with outside data. It was with data that we had, but we were not analyzing it properly and using it properly. Once we got to that point, it all started to unfold. And to go back to the investment and the return, what have we done with that money? We've hired A players. We also began going down the journey of automating our distribution centers. We just put our first automated goods-to-person system in our distribution center in Birmingham. We've got a 540% productivity improvement on that machine versus what we were doing before. Now think about it, 540% productivity improvement. It's a $10 million investment, but the work we did over here funded that investment. Got 2 more of those machines on order that'll come in this year and be installed. So we're funding the productivity gains that we're going to have. We're funding these activities with the benefits from the SPARXiQ involvement.
And we did a lot on pricing, and now we're turning our guns really on where are the customer opportunities to grow share of wallet, to be able to drive the most profitable segments of the business, to shift the portfolio. What does it mean financially for Motion to become that more selective, strategic portfolio manager, if you will, of the business?
Well, it'll allow us to grow at a faster rate than industry. I mean, it always, I mean, that's what you want to do. You want to grow faster than your competitors, right? So in doing this, it allows us to grow at an accelerated rate. And then if we can convert at a higher return, then it allows us more money to invest back in the business in other areas or return it to the shareholders. We are a publicly owned company, so we can return it to the shareholders. So, you know, without it, we would still be, you know, probably a $4.5 billion company with a, you know, 6% return on sales and, you know, no clear future of where we're going and when we're going to get there. We've got clarity now. We have goals, and we deliver on the commitments we make to our shareholders.
So as we think beyond the financial benefits, obviously Motion has reaped enormous financial benefits from the journey and will continue to. What about from a customer perspective? How is a customer better off today because of all these investments?
Well, I think we're more consistent with pricing at our customers than we were before. You think about it, when you've got sellers all across the country, and a lot of our business, half of our business actually is under a corporate contract. So you take a large corporate account that has 50 locations across the country, and in the past, they were getting 50 different prices on the same product.
Right.
The customer now has a much more consistent pricing from Motion. They can depend on us better. It allows us to invest in inventories where we need to because we're making a higher return on the products that we're selling. From the customer benefits side of it, I think the customers have been quite pleased with the changes that we've gone through, and they don't feel like they're being taken advantage of. You know, I mean, we're consistent with our pricing, and that makes a big difference.
And I think also investing in sales training for your sellers.
Investing in sales training, they're much more professional when they get in front of the customers. Customers appreciate it, and you heard the comments earlier about the sales journey changing, and it certainly has. We talk about an omni-channel approach, being able to serve the customer the way they want to be served, whether it's in person, whether it's by fax. There's still people that fax us, by the way. Whether it's email, and email has become probably the #1 way that we receive orders in these days, EDI, and then through our website. And you also heard earlier a comment about making sure that your website pricing matches your day in and day out pricing. That's particularly true with these corporate account customers that we serve. So all of that together allows the customer to have a better experience, allows us to be a better supplier to the customer, one that they can't do without.
So as we think about the sales transformation, I think there were a few points that we kind of used as our North Star along the way. If we would make the right actions in the sales force, if we'd have the right transformations, we'd make it better to be our customer, better to be a seller for the organization, investing in the career and the human capital of the sales team, make it harder to be the competitor of Motion, better to be the vendor of Motion, and better to be the shareholder of Motion. So all parties were really part of that sauce.
Yeah,
right?
and that was early on in the conversations that we said, here are the things that we want to come out of this with. And it was those points that David just mentioned. And, you might think, well, if we get one or two of those, we're good. No, you got to get them all. You've got to go into it with the mindset that you're going to get them all. And if you're missing out on one or two, you better figure out real quick, why are you missing out, and take the actions necessary to correct that and get on the right page.
So when you first came into the job, did you realize that the sales transformation would be such a critical piece to this whole thing?
When I first came into the role, I didn't realize exactly where we were. It didn't take me long, though, to realize that we had work to do if we were going to be best. Many of you probably know my counterpart in the genuine parts side, that the Napa organization is our sister company. So we're the industrial distribution side, Napa is the automotive side. They're bigger than us in revenue. They were bigger than us in profit contribution. And in the last couple of years, we're still lagging them on the revenue side, but we've caught them on the profit side. And I've told my counterpart, I'm going to kick your butt on the sales side this year, and I'm going to have your ass on the profit side too. Not that I'm competitive in any way, shape, or form.
So,
But,
So what's this whole story about buying up Command? Obviously, you generated a lot of wealth for the company through a bunch of these transformations. What was behind GPC's push to go after?
Well, we always have, we have a good, robust acquisition strategy. And part of our acquisition strategy is about every 5 years we buy what we call a game changer. A game changer we identify as a $500 million or larger distribution business. So we were going down the path. We had several that fit that category in 2021. We passed on 2, and then we took a long shot on Command. So we reached out to the private equity company that owned them, and we said we'd be interested if you guys would be interested in selling. They were. It was quite a fast process. We did our due diligence in 45 days. We put our best foot forward, and we reached a deal in mid-December and closed January 3rd. Now, with that, we pick up 1,700 employers, of which about 1,000 are in a selling role. So we have to go down the same journey now with Command. They were on a different journey with a different company than SPARXiQ, but I happen to think that SPARXiQ is the better plan. And they need to get on our plan, motion objectives, motion vision. And the only way to do that is to embrace what we're bringing to the table on the sales excellence and pricing side. So now our journey is to get them on board.
So how important was this transformation as you look back on the acquisition and the confidence to make the acquisition? How important was it having this level of success in pricing and or sales effectiveness?
Well, I think we competed with them on a regular basis out there. And they've got a lot of good people in the organization, which is part of the reason we bought them. We look at strategic fit, cultural fit, and talent anytime we look at an acquisition. Those 3 things are key. We knew that we had some opportunities if we could make the change with them to a more focused pricing and sales excellence plan. And they will certainly embrace the change. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. They typically sell a different type of customer than we do. We were selling the larger corporate national customers. They sold smaller mid-sized customers. So there are things that we can learn from them, and there are things they're going to learn from us. But at the end of the day, we're all going to be on the same team, fighting the same battles, playing by the same rules, and we're going to win.
I think one of the things that's exciting about Motion was that they first earned the kind of platform capabilities that made them a worthy acquirer. So a lot of big companies out there never really focus on the nuts and bolts, and they go out and acquire things basically just to grow, but there's no real accretive shareholder value. Whereas in this case, you had a very clear early obsession really with change. It's almost like a snake outgrowing its skin and shedding it and becoming this new, better version of itself.
Yeah, well, in this particular case, they had basically 3 business units, and those 3 business units lined up with our business very well. It allows us to double two of the business units in size when we combine the two. And then when we get to a point in the process where we start to employ the sales and the pricing strategies, it will push the margins up nicely. On the third part of the business, which was more in alignment with our core business, there were some huge synergies there from basically a real estate play where we had two branches in the same town now. We don't need two buildings. We're going to consolidate those. We'll take the synergies and take that to the bank, but we will pick up all of the sellers. And our mission now is to get all of those sellers on the same page and the same journey that the motion sellers have been on for the last several years. Once we do that, we will see the profitability amplified with the customers that we're serving, and we'll provide the customers with a better experience as well.
I just want to thank Randy for sharing all these insights with us, and please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, guys.